Welcome to the Helm Weekly Developer Meeting. It is April 15th, 2021. For announcements today, first one from yours truly is our branch renames to Maine are in progress. Looking down and just making a checklist of the ones that still needed to be done led me to start wondering about some things we might plan to archive. So I put that on the discussion list for later. But just in general, I just started making a checklist, but if you're thinking, oh yeah, I meant to do that, you meant to do that, go do that. And it's not difficult. There is a link of GitHub's rename. Okay, Mr. Farina, you're up next.
Sure. We had Patch Wednesday yesterday, and so 3.5.4 was released. It had just a couple of changes in it, but it's out there for Patch Wednesday. The next release will be 3.6.0, coming sometime next month after Kubernetes 121 is out. And then we'll have a little bit of time after that to hopefully pull in changes and updates.
Oh, 121 is out. It came out last week. It's so exciting. So we have all of the time now. Okay. Anything else announcement-wise before we jump into discussion questions or discussion topics? Okay. Mark, you wanted to talk about Docker Hub rate limits and a blog post.
Yeah, it's just last week we had, it was brought up. I don't remember by whom, but it was brought up and we didn't have enough maintainers present. So we just said we would talk about it today and I didn't want to forget. So I put it on the, so basically I think, it was you, Bridget. It was you, Bridget. So I'll let you maybe restate the concerns.
Oh, right. I know that there are Docker Hub rate limits that could affect some people who are using charts where they don't realize that it's pulling something from Docker Hub and they just are using a chart from the community. And in some cases, depending on what service or provider they're using, it might be taken care of talking is hard. It might be taken care of for them. In other cases, it may not. I'm wondering if this is something we feel the need to surface for the community, just that they can be aware that they might be using what they think is a perfectly good Helm chart that always used to work, and suddenly they're running into Docker Hub rate limits and they have no idea why. And so my question to the community was, is that something we think that the Helm community should clarify to users who might erroneously believe it is Helm's problem?
So last week we had started, I thought, well, that's, the responsibility of the people using Helm. It's not Helm's, but after discussion, others kind of came up with or agreed that it was a rightful concern and we should at least try to inform users. And I think that's when the blog post idea came up.
I started collecting some references and I did basically an outline and a TLDR, but I haven't written anything. And right now I have it in a gist. I can either just paste that gist in for people to start working with, or for actual editing, I can put it in a Google Doc if people would like me to do that. And then I can invite people who want to be able to edit that Google Doc to it.
I mean, that sounds good to me. I want to make sure that our long-time maintainers who are on the call don't have any red flags of, no, Helm doesn't want to get involved in this mired in this particular muck. And it's like, well, I definitely don't want to get into any kind of blame game or argument, just more when people come to us and say Helm is broken, which they will, we'll have something to point them to.
One thing I found while I was doing the research is apparently they've been enforcing the rate limits for a while. So this may be something that if anybody was going to hit it, they already have.
Yeah, as far as I'm aware, the rate limits have been in place since last October. I don't know. I'm of the view that this is a business decision that's being done by Docker Hub. And so people who are actively using that as their as their place for hosting their Docker images, that's their business decision to be making, and that's probably on them. I'm not too sure we should be in the business of explicitly stating out every single vendor's business decisions here and there. I can understand the reasons behind that and how that can affect other people, but I have a hard time coming up with like the reasons for why we should be the authors of every single vendor's business decision and why you should choose certain people or certain vendors over others. I think that's ultimately up to the actual chart maintainer and their ideas and decisions.
Yeah, and I can see that we don't really want to be in the business of leading people to, or away from certain hosts, and we don't want to look down on or look up to any vendors or members of the CNCF. And so there is that angle to it. And at the same time, this has been enforced for a while. And I know because I've worked for companies who've now had to deal with this situation with Docker Hub. And so I know it's been around for a while and people haven't been complaining to us, and I haven't seen the complaints, and I may be totally missing it. So let me ask this. Has anybody seen this as a problem that that needs to be addressed right now? Like, are people complaining? Is it coming up in the issue queue? Is it coming up in Slack or somewhere?
I've only seen it in the broader community, not in the issue queue. But that brings up a really good point. Maybe what we don't need is a blog post. Maybe what we need to do is revisit the section of the docs somebody would look at and make sure that it's clear that your upstreams are your business. Get your images from where you get them from, something like that. I can take that as an action item to look and see what it says in the docs about this.
Okay. I just don't want to try to solve a problem that doesn't exist, which is why I want to just make sure that
Absolutely.
the problem actually exists before we go doing a blog post and having it construed a certain way.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's why I was kind of like, okay, I think that that's probably all I wanted to get out of that discussion. So I'm going to look, the action item is I'll look in the docs and see if there's any place that we've left it ambiguous and therefore left it possibly in a Helm blaming territory. Back to you, Mr. Farina, to give a shameless plug.
Sure. I just have a shameless plug at that link. So at the Rancher meetup next Wednesday, I'll be presenting one of the projects that we've been working on over here that's Helm based. As the thing says, it's targeting cluster operators, an area that Helm specifically doesn't do as a CLI. And we'll walk through what we've been working on there, because we use Helm over at Rancher in a cluster operator manner. And so we've run into some issues, and I'm going to walk through what we're doing and a new tool we're working on. So it's just a shameless plug. I saw room.
Nice. Very cool. Great. I think I added one other item, which is I started just kind of threw everything in a doc and started walking through which repos still needed their main branch changed. And what I noticed was there were some things like charts and monocular that I think are either marked for this is obsolete or whatever, but they aren't necessarily marked as archived. Like, is there something specific we're waiting for? And I am looking at you, Farina, but is there something specific we're waiting for before we mark some of these older ones as archived?
Some of them can be archived right away. Somewhere I've got a list. Charts has like 5 or 6 repos that can be archived right now that were used in maintaining the Helm/charts repository. They provided support tooling, things like that. They can probably be archived in the short term. I've got a list somewhere. I just haven't had the time to go to it. The Helm/charts repository probably can't be yet until the HIP on tracking maintainers is done, because that's where that charts team still has its owner's file, and we need an alternative place. So there's a HIP that's blocking the archive of that one. Monocular, we probably just need to go through the formal process of doing it. We've done the vote and everything there to archive it. And mark it as obsolete. We just haven't jumped through the hoops of notifying people, taking the maintainers of that off of lists. A bunch of that logistical work needs to be done. And we need to let people know that this is overcome and you can use Artifact Hub instead.
Okay, fantastic. So it looks like the action item there is I sync up with Farina offline and I make a list of the tasks that we need to do for each of the ones that we're going to click the
Sure.
clicky on.
Sure.
And then I would also encourage everybody who feels empowered to go and click archive on things like Helm Summit notes from 2018, things like that. You're like, why is this a repo? If it shouldn't be a repo, click archive on it. And then we don't have to worry about changing its main or master branch. Okay, that's all I had on the list. I'm just kind of looking to see if anyone added anything. They didn't, but lots of people are here. So what do you folks want to talk about?
I believe technically only org maintainers should be archiving repos. So if you have permissions and you're not an org maintainer, please don't archive repos, but feel free to tell somebody.
Yes.
I'm pretty sure there's process for that because we have processes for everything now.
All right, fantastic.
I wanted to ask Farina first, thanks for the release yesterday. You had to manually figure out what PRs to pick, if I understand correctly.
Oh, they were just the closed PRs marked in the release. And
So
they
is
just
this-
didn't have the needs picked on them. Yeah, they
Right.
were closed. So when I went to the milestone, which I think I forgot to close, it was the end of my day. The milestone had 2 closed pull requests in it. And so it was just those.
Okay, well, yeah, right. And my question was, is that the usual process? Do you guys usually check, are there PRs that don't have the needs pick?
Oh,
Or it's
I
just
do.
because this,
I do.
Oh, yeah?
They usually don't have the needs pick on them. And so I go check.
Okay,
Oh yeah.
okay. Well, that complicates. All right.
I know, Mark, you've been trying to write up that process.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I really want to try to help with the releases, but then, I'm I don't follow every PR, so if they're not already merged by the maintainers, then it's difficult for me.
Yeah, and in this case, if I just go to the milestone and I see what's open and closed, anything that's open, if I've got time to review and try to get in, maybe that'll happen. If not, I just bump it to the next release, the things that are open. And then the closed ones are the ones that need to be picked into the release branch. And so I just look at the closed ones and add the tags and walk through them.
So they've ended up in the milestone because the maintainer thought about putting it in the milestone.
Yeah, so they all end up in the milestone. Some things are in the milestone before they're merged, but it's the things that are in the milestone that go out. We try to have every merged
Right,
pull
okay, yeah,
request
yeah,
have
yeah.
a milestone on it.
Okay, and they just forgot to put the needs pick. All right, okay,
Yeah.
that's not too hard. Okay,
Yeah.
thanks again for doing that. That's it.
Okay. All right, and we do have time to review one HIP that Butcher brought up. So Dr. Butcher, do you want to tell us about that?
I dropped a link in there. Mark, this is your HIP for backward compatibility documentation, one of the older ones. I think it just needs a couple of new lines removed and it's ready to merge. Fisher, what else do we need to do before we can mark this one as good?
This is the backwards compatibility
Yeah.
document. I believe that was informational, wasn't it? So as it's just like an actual document providing good information, I don't think there's any approval or any kind of acceptance criteria that's necessary for informational things. Once
It's a process PR, or it's marked as a process PR.
As a process, I believe through the HIP, it has to be approved by like the core maintainers. So like not a simple majority, but just like a simple minority or a lazy consensus vote to say that this document has been done. It's in draft process. It's ready to be finalized. I just want to make sure that everyone has taken a look at this to see if there needs to be any more changes. And then you can just make a PR to mark it as final.
But so I'm sorry, I've been really dragging my feet on looking back at that one. There's a reference implementation that I haven't done, which was to, kind of list the criteria for backwards compatibility. Do we not want that anymore, or should we not? Like, is the HIP the reference for what the backwards compatibility criteria are?
Generally speaking, if it's a process HIP, yeah, the HIP usually should be self-serving as its own documentation in some cases, unless it's a proposal to say make a new form of a documentation or something like that. Then it'll say the reference implementation is a document on Helm W on how backwards compatibility is addressed or things like that. So if there is like a contingent reference implementation required to be implemented by that HIP, then yes, it would need to be implemented before we mark it as final. But if
I felt that was important because I think this is a document that will live on. We need to keep adding to it. We're gonna hit things that we hadn't thought of. Butcher was very good. He put a lot of criteria, but you know, something's gonna come up about paths, about, you know, formats, about, and then if it's in the HIP, then we technically won't be able to update it.
You can update it. It's just a matter of you would supersede it and say, hey, here's a new HIP, and this is kind of like an interest, or we're talking about backwards compatibility. We're adding these new things to our criteria, and here's why. So
but I was thinking the master list has to be somewhere.
Yeah.
You know, the day that we want to say, you know, I review a PR and I think, oh, is this a backwards compatibility issue? I should be able to go to some master list that says, oh yeah, that I can't change this flag or whatever.
Something other than the HIP, I guess I have been assuming that with process HIPs, that was sort of what we'd be able to use, and informational HIPs, that'd be what we'd be able to use them for. But my really only context for saying that is the CRD informational HIP that I wrote. So this is the fun of doing these things for the first time. I kind of agree that it would be good to have this in the www documentation, because then users would be more likely to see it than rummaging around in the community repo. But I don't feel strongly that that would be a requirement prior to accepting the HIP like a regular reference implementation in code would be. So I'm open to really whichever you feel more strongly about, Mark, because we're kind of piloting the process HIP with this one.
I wonder, can we start with doing it in the HIP and then potentially at the first addendum, we say, okay, well, clearly this is evolving. We'll create a pay. We could do that if you want to go simpler.
Yeah. Say, for example, I think a clear example of this would be like the host name specification in RFCs. You talk about there's the original DNS subdomain RFC that was out there. Then they introduced further DNS subdomain RFCs that expanded upon the initial list, and they explained reasons for that. And yeah, I also see Butcher's point where he's saying it. I don't think it needs to be a prerequisite that we need to write the actual document in Helm W to finalize the actual HIP. I think I do agree. I think it would be great to have it in the documentation, but I don't think it needs to be a precursor to saying this HIP is approved because it's now in the documentation. It should be a living document on its own, and then the documentation can either reference the HIP and actually explain that in a easier, more readily available format than reading up.
So do I remove the reference implementation section from the HIP? Because I feel it's incomplete if it says there will be this and there is not.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll remove that. And there's a couple of open issues about tools that could be used to detect things. Do I just cross that out? When we have open issues in a HIP, what are we supposed to do? You know, marking it as final seems awkward in that sense.
If there are open discussions, like open questions in there, generally it's a good idea to have those questions answered in the document. Or if they're left as open questions, you can say something along the lines of, this is an unsolved problem that we had considered, but we haven't finalized it by the time that this document was finalized. And so it's just left as an open question for the future. So it can be used as like a reference for other people who have that question in the future for this document. They can go and reference that. So yeah.
Okay. So I could leave that section
of questions left to the reader for interpretation.
Okay. Okay. So 2 action items. Well, not 2 action items. 1, leave the open issues as they are. But 1 action item is for me is to remove the reference implementation and mention that the HIP will serve as the reference. Sorry for the reuse of the word, for the backwards compatibility criteria. I will do that. I will not waste time anymore. Thank you. Thank you, Busha, for bringing that up.
Awesome, great. Do we have any other topics for pressing discussion? While people are pondering whether or not they have such a topic, it looks like we have Matt Farina for moderator next week. We have Karina for notes, and we have Joe Julian is interested in shadowing on issue triage, which means we need a maintainer to be in charge of issue triage and answer questions as Joe attempts to answer some of the questions. Which maintainer would like to do that this coming week?
I'd be happy to. Joe, if you want to like message me on Slack or whatever, happy to carry on the conversation there.
That's good.
Fantastic. I love the idea of getting people onboarded to helping even more. Okay, do we have any other further discussion items for today? I do. I will say I put a link in the chat to 2 very small website PRs that I put in that require almost no thought. So if somebody wants to go and check on those, that would be easy and good. Other than that, I think we're in pretty good shape. I'm going to give everybody 6 minutes of their day back. How great is that? All right, we'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.
Good to see everyone. Bye-bye.